Good afternoon, everyone. Very pleased to receive Colin Gardener today, founder of Yonder Ventures. Hey, Colin, good afternoon, or should I say maybe good morning for you?
Yeah, definitely morning for me, but afternoon and evening for you guys. So
Yeah. So we're meeting among marketplaces geeks, and we're going to be talking about a specific trend that we see happening, which is the rise of B2B marketplaces. So, Colin, let's go for a ride, and maybe let's not beat around the bush too much. There's been a
totally.
lot of activity in the marketplace space over the last decade, but as I go to conferences and so on, I'm hearing B2B, B2B, B2B more and more. So, at least on this side of the pond, would be interesting to hear how is it developing in North America? What's your take there? And how do you explain the amount of interest that we're getting these days for B2B?
Yeah, I would say that in the U.S., B2B marketplace has been pretty hot, and I think in the past 2 years they've been in particularly interesting. I think a lot of them have started like in kind of a commodity markets or things like
Mm.
that, where it's like already there's like a lot of brokers and agents out there doing it, and so the whole insight was, hey, can we digitize this in some aspect and make it more efficient. But what we're starting to see more of too is, I'd say, B2B marketplaces that are less commodity and more trying to bring together like different kinds of assets and things like that that haven't traditionally been online or things like that, like heavy machinery, things like that.
Mm.
So definitely still popular. I would say the thing I've been looking for more and more is like what are B2B marketplaces that have network effects kind of built into them. I think a lot of B2B marketplaces tend to be more commodity based, and in those marketplaces, network effects are harder to build. And so, what I've been trying to watch for and look for really interesting things is kind of these non commodity B2B marketplaces.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It feels like we've got a kind of, there's the unbundling of Craigslist. And you're right in saying that in Europe as well, we've seen a lot of those commodity chemicals, metal marketplaces over the past decade. And now it seems to be happening in virtually every sector. Like if I look at just the past 6 months, we've seen and we've collaborated with marketplaces in pharmaceuticals, food and beverage, retail, fashion. So it seems to be happening everywhere. Can you think of one category that still hasn't been touched or disrupted by marketplaces?
It's a good question. I mean, I feel like if I knew that, I would probably be trying to build
Trying
something
to
or
do
invest
it.
there. But yeah, I think it's a good question on which ones that are like, I'm sure everything is being worked on. I'd say more of the area that I've been kind of like watching for is how AI can do something interesting, not just make business more efficient, but how someone could use some AI like applications for solving some business problems and in consumer side, but business in particular, like, is there like some AI matching at scale that can actually really open up some markets that were very hard to do anything with. And in particular, anything that is really disaggregated or like heterogeneous in supply, I think really lends itself well to AI potentially indexing and doing matching for you. And so that's the area I've been like salivating for. I haven't seen anything that's really like cracked the nut there. I've seen AI to help,
Yeah.
run marketplaces better, but not actually solve actually the marketplace function, which is the matching.
Yeah. I've seen it's a good one. I've seen it being used for what's the next best action, or consumers who've bought this might
Yeah.
enjoy that. And I've also seen a Miracle leverage AI for the process of catalog mapping, uploading your catalog onto a marketplace and making sure that it's properly referenced and all that, which was a good application of AI.
Totally.
But I think it's kind of year one of probably a multi-year journey of what AI could to supercharge marketplaces.
Yeah, I think the other area that's really interesting is just like almost like consumer-esque but business marketplaces for SMBs. I think there's still a lot of opportunity for services and products for SMBs, just
Mm.
marketplaces in those spaces that do like an extreme amount of aggregation. You already see a lot of like SaaS sites that will have like, here are all the tools you can have. It's basically an index or a listing site. But there's really no one that's like really nailing a marketplace, I'd say, for SMBs and different kinds of software offerings there. So that's another area I've been watching for. And there are people out there doing that, but it seems like a huge opportunity.
Yeah, and talking about this and what you were saying just a few moments ago, that in the report that we co-wrote, you talk a lot about the network effects and what it takes to create the flywheel for the marketplace. Can you dive a little bit deeper into this and how potentially B2B could differ from B2C in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, I think with all network effects, right? Like for a network effect to exist, you got to like as you add participants, nodes, whatever you want to use as the terminology there. Network has to increase in value, right? And so if you are always a transactional marketplace that by adding more participants or more sales in general that it doesn't increase the network effect, it's very hard to get economies of scale. And so the bigger issue there is like B2B marketplaces can really just look like a bigger brokerage, right? And there are some economies of scale that come from that, but there aren't necessarily like network effects that come from that. And so that's something I think about a lot for these B2B marketplaces is, especially in the commodity side, is like, how do you really build a network effect and kind of embed within different and make it defensible? And so I think what you're going to see a lot more of are these like SaaS enabled B2B marketplaces where, and it's already happening, where basically you service one side of the marketplace by solving a particular problem really well, embedding with them and really getting a system of record of like their inventory or demand and being able to like distribute it. I think that's what I see kind of like happening next and like one of the best ways to build defensibility. So that's.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. What we tend to see in Europe is that the marketplaces that build the biggest amount of value for the end users and therefore drive retention, command a higher take rate, are the ones that, as you say, are able to either create some kind of piece of software that serves either the sellers or the buyers, and they completely embed themselves in the workflow by automating some process and not just doing the matching and supporting a transaction, because at that point it's pretty easy to bypass you and displace you. And that's the holy grail, but it's quite a big endeavor to then create a layer of SaaS on top of the marketplace, build that value. So where would you start, or what's the typical trend that come for the service, stay for the marketplace, or the other way around?
I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. I think every market is a bit different and requires a deep look at it. Some marketplaces, like some markets, like, a vertical may already have demand aggregation pretty well solved, but they may not have supply aggregation solved. And so in those marketplaces, you may actually want to think about doing a SaaS product first and then building a marketplace on top of it because the demand is already pretty commodity. Whereas if demand is not aggregated yet, right, and supply is in some form aggregated or disaggregated, doesn't really matter, you may want to start with a marketplace first. And I think vertical SaaS and vertical marketplaces are essentially solving the same problems, but coming at it from different directions and eventually converge into the same spot. And so I think it just depends on the market, right? And that would be kind of my 2 cents on it. The thing I would say is that marketplaces, like this is at least what I think, is product market fit is transactions. SaaS product market fit is very different, right? SaaS product market fit is someone is willing to pay for your tool and use it and retain, right? Versus a marketplace is will people buy and sell, right? Or rent, whatever it may be. Like you have to connect supply and demand and do it at scale. And they're 2 different things. So for a marketplace, if you're not getting transactions, like you're not getting product market fit. For SaaS, you're not selling your product to people that want to use it. You're not getting product market fit. And so I think both of those things can happen when you go into a market and don't understand what is the best fit for that vertical.
Yeah. And one thing that I've seen that in a way differed in B2B versus B2C is that there's an element of repeat and loyalty that's more pregnant in B2B, in that once you found a good supplier, then you will be purchasing from them over and over again. Whereas if I go and buy a pair of sneakers, that's going to be once or twice a year, but I'm not going to be making, like, if I'm a restaurant and I'm purchasing and I found a good supplier of vegetables or whatever, I'm going to place 15 orders per month, and you'll have that repeat. That's fundamental, which is usage and evidence of PMF. And when a marketplace gets there, I guess in B2B, that's really where you have the proof in the pudding, whereas in B2C, the repeat component would be less important.
Yeah, I think it all depends on the transaction type, average order value, like just frequency of purchase. Like, so certain, I hate to say it depends, right? I tend to agree with you, like that, like, look, if you can show stickiness within your product of like demand and supply side retaining, I mean, sky's the limit, right? But I think there's also a lot of infrequent purchase marketplaces that are very like successful. And I think those just have a different kind of flavor. Like they're, high AOV, low frequency, right? That are really valuable because they usually index and put like the supply side on the long tail. Like it can show you all the inventory. Like you think like housing markets like Zillow, Trulia, very infrequent purchasing, but can essentially list almost all the supply so that it's easy to come there when you have it. And so you can capture a lot of demand. And similar on the B2B side, there's marketplaces that sell like high AOV, like equipment or things like that, where purchase frequency is maybe a couple of years, right? Every couple of years. But if they have high breadth of inventory, they can essentially be a one-stop shop and pull together all the demand to make that work.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're on the topic of managed marketplaces. Do you have an example in mind, like a striking example of a marketplace that has done a good job at creating that additional layer of services or SaaS that's solving a problem and creating loyalty?
So a business using the SaaS product, there's tons of them. I can name many. I think some interesting ones, and I may be biased because I'll talk about ones that I've invested in or work with. Machinery Park is one in the US, does new heavy equipment sales. They also have like SaaS products for integration with the OEMs, like their inventory. Another interesting one, HopSkip, is B2B marketplace for hotels and event planners to connect, and they have essentially SaaS software on both sides for the planners to run their planning process and for hotels to run their RFP process, and then connects them. There's tons of examples. Outdoorsy, which is B2B, but we were I think one of the first to pioneer this whole SaaS nailed marketplace model. We built a software, B2B SaaS software for people to run their RV rental fleets on called Wheelbase, worldwide software, hundreds of customers, and really it's a standalone product now. So there's tons of examples out there, and the list could go on.
Fascinating. I think it's really useful because it gives people an idea of what we mean. And I guess oftentimes people don't realize that marketplaces can be much more than just matching together a seller and a buyer. And it's actually disrupting an existing value chain and pushing practices for everyone. Still, on a slightly different note, oftentimes what I'd like to emphasize when people are optimizing their marketplace is that there are two big levers. One is the trust, and the other one is the convenience that are critical for marketplace success. Because if you lack the trust, then people will be reluctant to join you, or there's the convenience. The convenience is not 10x better than the existing, then they might land on the marketplace but not complete the transaction. And in this, you have marketplaces that are transactional, some that aren't, but we see a big trend of marketplaces saying we're going to be in the flow of funds, we're going to support the transaction, and that's going to help us monetize, avoid bypass, and also bring a lot of trust to our users because we're not just a matching engine and then you guys deal with it. We support the whole flow of the transaction. Potentially, we protect sellers against the risk of non-payment. We protect buyers from the risk of non-performance by the suppliers. So we really facilitate the transaction and thereby create more trust and more convenience. Do you see that trend of marketplaces taking over the transactions and embedding themselves into the flow of funds?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very common want to do that, right? I think you earn that in a lot of ways by showing that you can connect supply and demand, right? And
Mhm.
like earning the trust there, like you said. But I also think you can get there if you can kind of fintech enable your marketplace to have better payment terms, easier like invoice factoring, whatever it may be that helps in the industry can really be an advantage. And so I've seen it. There's a company downstream that does it, this like kind of Uber for short-term waste management. And one of the bigger problems they have is just invoicing and payments in that industry. It's a lot of
Mm.
SMBs. And so they've been able to just provide payment rails essentially and kind of invoicing such that people want to just use it because it's valuable to them, right? And
Yeah.
it makes everything easier. So I think it depends on the industry, but like overall, you want to do that so that you can, prevent disintermediation, you can really like help facilitate transactions and have full visibility into all the GMV going through the platform.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Earlier this year, we conducted a survey of like 500 businesses in Europe, and we saw that there was a staggering stat, which was that 83% of B2B buyers would abandon an e-commerce purchase if they didn't have payment terms. Your perspective as a marketplace guru, what role do you see for payment terms at the checkout for a B2B marketplace?
I mean, I think it's like there's a lot of path dependency on what has happened in that industry before. So I think as a founder of a B2B marketplace, you really got to understand what is market, so to speak,
Yeah. What's the
and really,
practice?
yeah, either deliver better or deliver exactly the same as what's expected.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. I think if you come in from a consumer mindset and you're like, hey, they're going to put down a credit card and buy this,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen, right? I think if anything, credit card will be less likely and invoicing more popular, right? And so I really stress with B2B marketplace founders, like if you don't come in with like a pretty solid idea of how you're going to handle either financing or floating, like the transactions, you're going to really struggle basically because you're going to be able to get to the 1 yard line, so to speak, of like a transaction, and then it'll fall apart because you haven't figured out the float, like
Yeah.
who's holding an escrow, who's doing all these things, and real innovation and I think product innovation there for B2B marketplaces is where they can win.
Yeah, and I think the industry has really matured over the past maybe 4 to 5 years because let's say till the 2015 or so, there was a lot of replication of the B2C checkout into B2B. Credit cards, even when it was either credit cards if the AOV was low enough, and if it was too high, then the marketplace just wouldn't support the payment workflow and would ask the sellers and the buyers to just pay each other off platform through a bank transfer or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's been a lot of maturity there. So final question. That's
Let's do
the
it.
one about the secret sauce. And this campaign is all about understanding the secrets behind the B2B marketplaces. And as you said, it's very dependent on the sector. And is it the buyers that are disaggregated, or is it the suppliers? And there are lots of different scenarios. But in your experience, is there one thing or one quirk that you believe makes a great contribution to the success of the best B2B marketplaces?
Yeah, I think one of the key things overall, and this is kind of taking a page out of the consumer book, is that you would never build a consumer marketplace that wasn't self-service, right?
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
think in the B2B space, there is a lot of companies that get traction
Mm.
and get even to like Series A phase by building kind of a tech-enabled brokerage. Like maybe the founder is the best salesperson from XYZ industry, and they're like, there should be a marketplace for this. And really, they bring their Rolodex, they bring people in, but it's not really like true matching, right? They can get to significant GMV, but they really haven't crossed the chasm into people
Mm.
adopting and using the marketplace because the technology makes it a better experience and makes it more efficient. And I think that's like the thing that I think is the secret sauce, and what I look for a lot in marketplaces is like, have they like early on figured out a product experience or like innovation such that people want to go use this outside of using like brokers or agents or whatever. That's something I think about a lot. Like, is like, where is that kind of that self-service element come in? So
that extra thing, tech component that you can bring, I think that's right, because so many times you see a marketplace that starts with, hey, it's just a glorified product catalog and maybe a slightly broader catalog than what individual suppliers would offer, but there's no real differentiation there unless you can bring an element in the experience or that software layer that gives you defensibility and differentiation from what exists.
totally agreed.
So yeah, that's a good one. I had never thought of articulating it this way, but really great insight. Thank you, Colin, so much for sharing your expertise about B2B marketplaces. Really appreciate it. And for everyone, stay tuned for the report.
All right, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Colin.